Well, there we are. Welcome to A Language of Healing Live. It is June 3rd, 2020. Interesting days we're living in. And so tonight we're going to be discussing staking out the common ground. And got a wonderful panel that I'm looking around. Lots of really good looking people. Really thankful for Josh and Carolyn Armstrong. They are the founders of Common Ground here in Bakersfield, California, which became a real safe place for people to have questions and people to ask questions and to talk through without judgment on issues surrounding race, sexuality, abortion, all of the hot topics, politics, and when they stepped up to the plate in this city and began doing what they do, the tenor of my city changed a little bit. So I have a lot of respect for this couple. And they're going to take this over and go ahead and lead us in discussion. But please welcome my friends, Josh and Carolyn Armstrong.
Hey.
Hey. Thank you. Thanks, Bob. We really appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's definitely a privilege and an honor. And it's something that we've been missing too, because like you said, we usually host conversations with diverse groups trying to tackle hard topics. It's something we really enjoy doing, but with the whole pandemic and the shelter in place, we haven't been able to do that and have folks over. So this is an awesome opportunity. This is something that we really believe in. So thank you for this opportunity. I thought, before we get into it, is it all right if we do a quick little prayer? That's something we like to do before we start at Common Ground. We believe that, Jesus is our common ground. He's kind of the one who binds us together and can really be the facilitator of these conversations. So maybe actually, Cecil, can I have my buddy Cecil do an opening prayer for us real quick, if you don't mind, man?
Not at all. I'd be honored. So, Father, we come before you right now, and I just thank you. We invite you into these discussions. We invite you into this space. And I thank you that we do have the opportunity to do this. So may we honor you in all that we say and all that we do, and want to seek you and your kingdom first. That's our heart, and show us how to find common ground with each other and with those in the world as well. And we just want to see your kingdom to be expanded here on earth as it is in heaven. So may you be glorified and may your enemies be horrified. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
So we've got a few discussion questions here that we're going to get into, and what we say, like at our Common Ground meetings, is we know that these topics are huge a lot of times, and we could go on and on for weeks on them. So we try to manage people's expectations, in that this is hopefully something that just kind of whets your appetite for these conversations, and this is sort of a practice, I think, too, that we're learning how to have these conversations, because as we look out the window into our world, we live in an increasingly polarized world. And we're seeing people retreat into their own kind of groups, their own communities, and become more and more isolated from the rest of the world. And so we want to boldly, just bravely head into these conversations. So we admire all of you, and we appreciate all of you. And thank you for coming to the metaphorical table to discuss. So the first question that we've got here for the panel is, how can we use a language of healing to speak to the ever-widening racial divide, especially in light of the protests following the death of George Floyd, and then numerous others too that were tragically killed over the last few weeks and months. So what do you guys think? And at the head, I meant to also just thank Wayne Jacobson and Bob Prater and Arnita Taylor as well for this book that is incredibly timely, the language of healing. So how can we use this? How can we use this language of healing that they outline in their book to engage with some of these things, to speak into this ever widening racial divide?
Hey guys, and when you jump in, if it's your first time speaking in tonight's session, kind of give a brief introduction of who you are, where you're from, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, sorry about that, Bob. I got a little overexcited to get into the content.
My gosh, Joshua.
Go ahead and say your names too, or maybe should we put the brakes on that first question too, Bob? Would you rather we could go around, say all our names?
No, we don't need to. Just when you come in on your first one, just go ahead and say, hey, I'm like let me do this. I'm Bob Prater. I live in Bakersfield, California. I am one of the authors of A Language of Healing for a Polarized Nation. The racial divide is real. I was very privileged to be part of a panel yesterday. My friend Arlena Waller, who is here, put together a Zoom panel with the Bakersfield Police Department and local officials. And just FYI, guys, Bakersfield, California, in 2015, I don't know where they are right now, they were #1 in the nation in death, or not death, but shootings by law enforcement. #1, 13.6 per million. The national average is 3.6 per million. So we are nearly 3 times the national average. That tells me there are systemic issues. So I was very grateful to be part of that panel, and we were able to do what I like to do, which is speak truth to power. And some feathers were ruffled, but also some hearts were heard. And we found out that there really are not any easy answers. But for me, when you take empathy and you allow yourself to feel through someone else's experiences, feel what they feel, see how they see a little bit. I've been privileged to be able to go out on a march and into the inner city of my city, where I chanted right along with them, Black Lives Matter. But it takes more than that. It takes, especially in a city like Bakersfield, which has a real history of racism. There have been cross burnings since I moved here in 1986. So I recognize that this is deep seated. But to me, the beginning has to be dialogue.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, can I chime in real quick? Cecil Ramos from Bakersfield, California. I've been a missionary overseas in Thailand for approximately seven years, and we're headed back in a couple months as well, so it's good to be here. But I just wanted to point out what I've been appreciating about your guys' book as well, is that at the end of each chapter, it talks about 3 steps. Here's a step to crawl, here's a step to walk, and here's a step to run. What I have found helpful is coming to the table and coming to a common ground, is really understanding the narrative of my brothers and sisters of color, my Black brothers and sisters in particular, and having to do the homework. You know, I think sometimes just a quick meme or a quick 1-minute video or whatever, some people want to consume information that way. But I think going through the hard work of going through a book, having those conversations, getting to context, doing homework, and following some of these steps, I felt has been really helpful for me. And it's really a timely opportunity as well. So that's something that I just want to chime in on.
Now, I was looking at this question, and I think there are some people that would disagree with parts of the question itself about the racial divide being ever widening. Some people I know who would disagree with that statement, that the divide is widening. So I just kind of want to jump back and say, as part of the question, do you agree that the divide is currently widening?
Yeah, and that's if I can add on that really quick too. That's a good point that Carolyn brings up. That just for the tone of the conversation, we want this to be a space where you can disagree with the discussion question itself, or definitely put something out there that you feel might not be well received. Like, we need spaces like this where you can put your ideas out there. I think there's a lot of folks who have an idea, but they feel like it maybe is welcome in one setting and not in another. But we do need to kind of cultivate a space where we can be honest with each other and be authentic and like, hey, this is where I am, this is what I feel, and put it out there, you know, and maybe you'll get some pushback, and that's okay too, but just be ready to put those ideas out there. So, yeah. Does anybody?
I would like to jump in. My name is Arlena Waller. I'm in Bakersfield. I am the founder of She Power and the MLK Community Initiative across the board. But at the end of the day, we're about closing the gap. I don't think the racial divide is widening. Because if you look at our society, and if you look at what's happening right now, all over the world, people are coming together and they're saying no more. We're tired of this. we're loving on each other in a way we haven't loved on each other. But what is the root of the racism? It's the system, the power that certain bees refuse to let go of. And I think when you get into an elected position, that power becomes addictive. And so you fall in line with the system of power, and you allow the racial divide to continue happening because now it is an economy. So if we're just talking about everyday people, I don't think the racial divide is widening. I think it falls in lines with our leadership and those above who wants to keep fueling this thing because it's very lucrative if we hate each other.
Yeah, I'm Wayne Jacobson. I'm Wayne Jacobson from Thousand Oaks, California. I'm one of the authors of the book as well. I agree with you, Arlena. My email through this crisis has been as positive as I've seen in a long time. I don't find, particularly over these kinds of shootings like George Floyd's, usually there's a lot of people from the majority culture always trying to justify why it was necessary and looking for whatever we could pick up on him. Almost unanimously, people are saying that this is completely unjustified, indefensible. I also hear from my African-American friends who are saying when this shooting happened again, they had this overwhelming sense of hopelessness. That, boy, here it goes again, nothing's ever going to change. But in the ensuing days, observing the things that you've observed, Arlena, people are saying, gosh, I have hope for the first time, that there are voices coming alongside us, and that maybe, just maybe, but the forces that you talk about, I think media and politicians have that vested interest in keeping us polarized. They do. They always have. And if we can find voices beneath that, around that, because those voices aren't going to change. But I think that you get to that, I've always said this, it's that outward 10% on either side that seems to get all the play. The inner 78% or so of people really want to fix this, really want to get this right. And I think this is an opportunity, if we can stimulate those conversations, to actually find a common ground we can hang a future on.
Yeah, how about anybody else? Maybe someone has been quiet.
Melody Bradley from Cedar Hill, Texas, and a very barking dog. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
She's being a little ornery. They're trying to get her out. I apologize. But I don't think it is worse. I think that everyday people are in a better place. And I'll say that I'm from Cedar Hill, Texas. I just finished my 20th year in public education. And I have received 3 emails from 3 white women who were substitutes in my class throughout this year. Older women who have offered words of comfort and concern. So I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Waller that it is the money issue that is pushing us to stay divided. I have a 17-year-old son who I ask daily, weekly, even before these recent terms. Do you feel like you experience racism? You know, how are people treating you that don't look like you or look like you? And he doesn't feel it. He doesn't see it in the way that I experience it or may see it for him. So I definitely think we're doing a better job with our children. And most of us want to do differently, but sometimes our need for money or to rock the boat or to be polarized by the people closest to us is very detrimental and puts you in a place that you don't necessarily want to be in or have yet to experience isolation in a way. And I think that the pandemic, God has a very timely way of doing things, that this isolation happened prior to these very vivid events, have caused some of us to be more conscious than we probably would have been had we been going about our everyday life.
So it kind of, yeah, this is kind of the opportunity to just reflect and to meditate on what's going on. You know, something I wanted to ask y'all too, to add on this question. You know, I noticed, Arlena, you were speaking about systems, like these systems of power, I think I heard you say. And I notice, well, just as Wayne was saying, that we're kind of all seem to be on the same page. But I think I have noticed many of my white friends, like on social media, although everyone seems to be against, of course, the killing of George Floyd, there does seem to be different ways maybe that they're interpreting the events. So I do hear a lot of my white friends interpreting it as like an individual racist, like, the police officer or maybe the series of police officers are the problem, and we kind of need to band together to get them. And then I've heard a lot of my friends of color really see this as an example of a pattern, something that's more of a system, something that's more structural. Have any of you encountered that, or has that different way of seeing these things? Has that been a point of division for any of y'all?
So not to take up the top. Oh, okay. I have. And I shared this with Bob. I recently had to call out our Bakersfield Police Department because I experienced some of the vile hate racism simply because of the color of my skin, to a degree where I was afraid for my life. And I was afraid for my children's life. And after we went through and I filed the report, that was pretty much all I could do until they either harmed me or murdered me. And I talked 3 days with a detective looking for different ways, different angles that I can actually get some justice for what happened and not further put my life in danger by fueling more hate. The system failed me on every single side. So basically, I was subject to potentially having my life in danger. Now, not all of us are over this hate, right? We all have our biases. This individual represents a lot of individuals in America, maybe not in our inner circles, but we still have that hate fueling rapidly in America, and I was subject to that. And I may be, on a personal basis, cell phone basis with our chief or with our sheriff, but that does not protect me. The system failed me. This is the second time I've had to make a call and make a report, and the system failed me both times.
Thank you for sharing that.
I want to be real clear. I haven't said much, but a language of healing for a polarized nation is not targeting systematic racism. It is not. That was never a thought in our mind. We cannot take on all of the institutionalized racism and oppression in all of the many systems in America. That is not what the authors had in mind when we wrote. We are targeting individual ways for you to deal with your own individual racist hidden stuff in your heart. So I kind of wanted to bring that back to the middle. So to answer your question as to how a language of healing can help along racial divides, we have a whole chapter called Bust Up Your Bias. That's the first place to start. You have to become more aware of your unconscious bias. And I know that's hard because it's unconscious. But just being more aware of what triggers you, what makes you angry, and those kind of things. That's a way that chapter in the book can be used to help you see how you may not add to a bigger racial divide. Just to answer your question, and I we get that question all the time about systemic racism. If we could solve systemic racism, we would not be here on this talk with you, or I wouldn't. We would probably be doing something different, because that's a real big solve there. So again, it's so easy to push stuff off to systems and be external. This book is about you looking at yourself and what can you do on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis to help you become not part of a deeper racial divide, or to shorten the gap of the racial divide. And so that's why I was kind of being quiet. I was like, that wasn't our targeted goal in the language of healing. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Arnita. And I think Matthew was in the queue too. You had something you wanted to say, right, Matthew?
No, yeah. Something that I was just thinking about with regards to the first question. Two things came to my mind. The first thing, what kind of language can we use? How do we speak a healing language? I came across, I think it was a tweet a few days ago, and it talked about how so often listening can be mistaken for love. Like if somebody feels listened to, a lot of times people can see that as somebody showing affection for them or somebody caring for them. And I think one way that we can, that we can try to be loving in this time, regardless of where we sit ideologically on what happens, is just being willing to listen to people and to listen to their experiences, and not to jump in and try to explain or, have an explanation for why they do things or why they think certain things. Starting off just listening to people. I think that's something people appreciate. Something that I am also thinking about, just with regards to the racial divide, I don't think the racial divide has necessarily gotten worse, but I do feel as though it's been clarified a little bit just in the past few weeks, because we've been divided for a very long time. And I am a firm believer that there's more that unites us than there is that divides us. And I think for a long time, a lot of us have been focusing on the things that do unite us. And I think that's really important. And I think it's good that we rejoice in and that we celebrate those things. But realistically, I think like Arlena pointed out, there are things systematically that divide us. Like Arnita mentioned, there are things like socially, that divide us. We have different opinions on a lot of different issues, and seeing these things come up have allowed us all to really see those differences for where they are. And I don't think we should be afraid of discussing those differences. I think we should be willing to listen, so that some of that healing can take place. Because I do feel like, we can move past a lot of what does divide us if we truly work on it. I think so often we like to simply focus on what unites us. And like I said, those are things that should be celebrated. But in terms of what divides us, like we don't have to be divided on certain things. And I feel like, in regards to like the system, that's one way that we can work on, bridging the divide, in terms of, your social interactions with other people, how you feel about people of different races, addressing those issues, and, maybe thinking about why I'm programmed or why I've been taught to think about certain people a certain way, talking about those things. I think that those can heal the divide. There's a lot to that question, but I do think there is a divide. I don't think it's necessarily moving in any way. I do think, if anything, we are starting to come together a little bit more. And I think the past few weeks have showed that a lot of people are willing to stand up for injustice. It'll be interesting seeing like how people move forward from just talking about it, because the work, like the actual work, like Arnita mentioned, it really is hard. It is really the personal stuff. It's going into your heart, and it's facing the day-to-day things that you think about people that you don't necessarily know based upon what you've been taught to think about people. And that's something that I think people need to think about on, regardless of where they sit, on a lot of these race issues, because a lot of us, we don't think about that enough. So yeah, honestly, I forgot. I jumped in and I didn't explain who I was. My name is Matthew Edwards. I'm new. This is my first time in this type of discussion forum. I'm fairly young. I graduated from college about 2 years ago, still trying to figure my life out. I've been substitute teaching for a little bit, and I'm thinking about maybe becoming a teacher. Still kind of unclear, but I live in Bakersfield. I was born here. I've moved around a lot. I went to school in New York, which was a really good experience for me, just kind of getting to meet a lot of different types of people and see a lot of different types of cultures and a lot of different types of passions. In terms of my upbringing, I've been raised in mostly white areas. So my experience has been interesting because I feel like growing up, I've learned to be very conscious of my race and how, who I am and how I look affects the way that people do perceive me. But at the same time, I'm very grateful I grew up in a Christian household, and, the concept of grace did not miss me. So when dealing with a lot of race, issues, I try to hold the same grace that Christ had towards me, and just, in teaching people. And not everybody's going to be, not everybody's going to change their perspective. Not everybody's going to love you, and that's okay. But all you can really do is, carry the truth wherever you are, and, try to make sure you're holding on to your own dignity in the process, and, pray for people, and just do the work in yourself first, and, have faith that it'll start being done in other people. Sorry, that was kind of long-winded, but that was it.
I love it, man. Appreciate it.
And I think that kind of what you were talking about, that being able to listen, it requires, it's hard work because it requires you to be humble, and it requires you to question everything you believe. And that's why it's so hard. And that's why a lot of people don't want to do that, and they don't want to they don't want to, it's hard to be humble, and it's hard to question yourself and why do I believe that? Why do I react this way? So yeah, I agree. It's really hard work, and it requires you to really take just a step back and be humble and just listen for a while and just kind of check yourself and observe your own reactions and emotions to things.
Yeah, and I think we'll go on to the next question too, for the sake of time. Do you want to?
Okay, so with this being a presidential election year, how can we find common ground with family and friends who view the world through a different lens?
And any of the folks who haven't spoken yet, would you like to chime in? I don't want to put anybody on blast, but let's see. We got Kim, Janet, Bob. I think you three, you haven't shared yet. If you have any thoughts on this question. No takers. Oh, Janet, we got Janet.
Janet, you're still muted. You need to unmute. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah,
There you go.
Hi. Yeah, this is a brave one to volunteer for. And this is totally practice for me. Matthew, is my first time to do anything like this too. My name is Janet Newberry. I live in the Woodlands, Texas. Yay for Texas, Melody. And which is just north of Houston. My husband and I did a strange thing about 3 years ago. We sold our house and traveled America in an Airstream to sit at the table with America and have conversations. And it's a long story, but it was an interesting 3 years. We moved to the Woodlands in November, right? We feel like we've been locked down almost since we got here. While we were on that adventure, we started a podcast called Love is Fearless. And I also wrote and published a book called Education by Design, Not Default: How Brave Love Creates Fearless Learning. And so my heart, yes, thank you. My heart is because fear divides, and fear is our common ground. I think we could find common ground. We could all agree on some things that we're all afraid of right now. And so I think it's one of the things that we do on our podcast is I've tried to stop looking at the world, and this is a weird thing for a Christian girl to say. I've tried to stop looking at the world and looking at issues as good and bad, as right and wrong. I've tried to start looking at where is the fear, and how could love enter into that place and do what love does. And so I think that's important because shame often enters our conversations when we talk about politics, and shame pushes people away. And so it's when we feel afraid, sometimes we just have a habit of shaming one another. And I think that's a hard habit to break without doing the hard stuff in our own hearts. And I've got some hard stuff to deal with. I mean, can't even tell you how much this stuff has triggered me. And I've had friends reach out to me and say, why am I triggered about the word privilege? I mean, I'll just be honest, why am I triggered about the word privilege? And yesterday, my husband and I did a Facebook Live recording of an episode that I'll publish next week on privilege and responsibility. But it was hard for me to even get there. I'll just admit it, because of the shame attached to that whole concept, and the difference between shame and guilt. And so the question is about I'll restate it. How do we find common ground in an election year? And wow, what an election year it is. And I think if we can find the common ground where, like, if we're looking in a conversation, I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to ask myself, so what are they afraid of? If we disagree, what are they afraid of? And am I afraid of that too? Because there's
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go for it.
I'm going to chime in here because I want to go back to, in the book, I think we have a genius definition of common ground, which may not be necessarily what Josh and Carolyn defines as common ground. But we define it in the book as common ground, however, is not where we all agree, but where we map out an environment in which we can discuss our differences with mutual respect and seek a solution that is fair to those differences. So I think it all depends on how you're defining common ground. Even in any major election year, if we can create that type of environment that of the definition that we put in a language of healing, we don't have to necessarily have animosity and hard feelings and shame around our own difference. I think we make it something that is not when you think common ground means I have to agree with you. And that's just something that I've noticed throughout life. If common ground means we agree, and then we're going to have a hard time. We're going to be able to agree on some big macro concepts, but the micro concepts we're going to lose. So I just love our definition in the book on that. So I just wanted to throw that out, that it's not a place that we all have to agree, but we have to fight for each person's right to believe what they believe in those situations. So that may give it a twist, but I think that's a real healthy way to define common ground.
Thanks, Arnita. So, some of the themes that I hear coming up, some of like what Matthew was saying too about, learning to appreciate our differences and not just like pretend that we're not different. Learning to have space where we can disagree respectfully and we can actually engage in those disagreements. A lot of that is something that, and I'm going to broad brush here for a minute for my own culture, kind of white culture, dominant culture. Some things that I've had kind of pointed out to me, in many cases by people of color, is that there's certain values that we have, typically in white culture. Again, I gave my preface and I'm broad brushing, but some things even that Dr. King, I think, in his letter from a Birmingham jail, he talks about this sort of moderate white dominant culture that prefers order, over justice, sort of a superficial peace over kind of rolling up your sleeves and getting into the muck of it and being willing to go there into an uncomfortable place. So I think that's something that, for a lot of white tables and white communities and culture, we kind of often have no-fly zones. Like we have these values or these ideas that we just don't talk about that kind of stuff. Like it's rude to bring up religion and politics or these sort of things because we might disagree and we can't have that. So we're all just gonna pretend, that we love each other. We got, Uncle Larry here who thinks some things that I think are, reprehensible, but I'm not gonna bring it up, and he thinks I'm an idiot, and I'm not, So often we have difficulty, I think, going there. So maybe that's part of it. Like how do we learn how to have these conversations instead of all just pretending? We sit at Thanksgiving dinner and we see the world so differently, but we pretend that it doesn't matter. Like how do we? Maybe if you guys have some thoughts on that, how do we be more brave, I guess, more willing, more thick-skinned, and more humble to actually start the conversations to begin with?
I think it helps too to realize there are some people you can have these conversations with and there are some that you cannot. And I think anger and contempt are really good examples to say, once the conversation starts down that direction, my first thought is saying, and I'll say that to someone, hey, do we really want to go there? I'm really listening and hearing you out. But if you're the standard of intelligence, so if anybody disagrees with you, they're idiots, they're stupid, they're whatever, we're not going further. We're not. And it really is for us to check our own attitudes in that. If we can be calm, if we can be in a discussion that often asks questions more than it states opinions, I think we can have some very fruitful conversations, even with people who disagree with us. But if our objective is, man, if you don't agree with me, you're out of line, and I'm going to make you agree with me, and I'm going to keep piling on my information, which is different than their information, because we don't even have the same news media outlets anymore. To be a voice for that is to be calm and to ask questions and to take the conversation as far as it can go until it gets angry or contemptuous, and then just say, really, I'm not into that kind of conversation, just back out. If you give people space to believe differently, I find most people will calm down and have a good discussion with you. If they feel manipulated, and I think this is a bad year for that because of the election year, and the politicians are going to manipulate our anger to get us where they want. So that's all part of it. But I still will go back to saying most citizens want to have a calmer, reasoned discussion. Most do. There's these few outliers on the extremes. They don't. They want to foment anger and rage and fear. And those just only get marginalized by better voices.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Wayne, about about listening, and it reminded me too of what Matthew was saying about how people who feel heard like feel loved. Yeah, I think that's huge. I think that's big, and and that seems like the way of Jesus too for the Christians here, to take up your cross, and say like, I'm going to give you that. I can see you're really agitated about a lot of stuff that's going on in the world and politics, and tell me about it. Why are you? What are your fears in that? To go to what Janet was saying too, where are those fears coming from? Help me understand those fears. I can tell this really bothers you. Why do undocumented immigrants, you feel they're pouring into the country and they're endangering your livelihood? And tell me about that. Tell me about your fears about that you're not going to have enough. Your family's going to go hungry, what have you. So yeah, I think that's huge. How about?
Can I jump in?
Oh yeah, absolutely, Bob. What do you got?
For me, heavy doses of empathy again. I'm a former conservative man. I would listen to Rush Limbaugh religiously, which surprises probably some of my closer friends in here, because somewhere along the line something shifted, and when it shifted, I made it my mission to go and tell everybody how stupid they were. It's just how we do. I did become the standard of intelligence. I mean, I'm always the standard of intelligence, right? As Wayne said. But then when you realize that you don't know everything, and when you sit with heavy doses of empathy and with love, and you bring honor into a conversation, and I just don't go into these things thinking I'm going to change anybody's mind, honestly. But I always go in thinking I can change their heart. And that's for real. That's where I live. And so I think when we begin to again see through others' eyes, fear is certainly a big deal, Janet, as you said. And so it becomes, what are you afraid of? And so when I can put myself in their shoes and say, well, they're afraid of this, this, and this, I can feel that, because I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. For me, the other thing is proximity, being around people who don't look like me. And one of the big ones for me was, I had a gift to play pickup basketball in this city of Bakersfield for 25 years, where almost always I was the only guy that looked like me. And it became a real gift for me to be able to hang out with people who saw the world through a different lens. And then when I met a man named Ahmad Mirza, who was the leader of the Muslim community here in Bakersfield, in Kern County, and the only practicing Amir in the entire United States, and we began to hang out, I suddenly realized I couldn't think the same way about Muslims anymore, because one of my best friends, and he really is on this hand as one of my 5 best friends on the earth. We do a podcast together called A Christian and a Muslim Walk Into a Studio, and we love each other for real. I mean, I love him as a man and as a friend, and I know that that there's nothing that he would not do for me or my family, and I think that he knows the same about me. But I can't have that until I invite him into my circle. Proximity is everything.
Yeah, I love that, Bob. That's good.
Can I add to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the things I've noticed is what this book has done is given people permission to have the conversation, because these are hard conversations, and I think are needed bringing it back. I started thinking, you're absolutely right. We can't focus on the system, because if we look at the way people are reacting now, we have to question, is this something that you felt before? Is this really who you are? Why have you been silent? This is not new. Mm-hmm. And so I think this platform is giving people permission to explore. Mm-hmm. Was I really like that? Am I like that? And if so, am I going to continue being like that, or am I going to do something about it? So you're right. We do have to focus on the individual racism because it's very real. But I think that this platform, this book really are giving the world permission to have that dialogue and find out where we really stand.
That's good.
I wanted to comment on Bob, what you were saying about proximity. I think that is important. And we've already talked about, but it's also having that humble spirit and creating a safe space for people to actually open up and share their true experiences. Because if they've got you pegged as someone who's gonna hold on to their opinions and not truly listen, then they're not gonna truly open up and share with you, because you're not a person who they can safely do that with, especially people of color who've been carrying a lot of the injustice on their shoulders, just carrying that weight of the culture. If you're not a safe person to share with, then they're not going to do that. So that whole humble, contrite spirit is always important.
Yeah, and
I'll just briefly add, I'm sorry,
yeah, no,
that
absolutely.
the concept in the book that covers groupthink. I think a lot of, when we think about the election, we groupthink that you have to align yourself one way or the other. And you are lumped in that, even if most of what they're saying is not how you truly feel, it's not a true fit. And so that cause of how we host elections and proceed, it's a lot of groupthink. And it's hard to be an individual in a group. And for me, this book gave me my voice back. Like, a lot of this has been in me. I've been a peacemaker. I can remember being in 5th grade and my teacher pulling me out of the classroom to say, hey, I'm going to put you in a group with so-and-so. And he was the biggest bully. Everybody was afraid of him, because you can work with everybody. So I've had a sense of peace in me. That's just how I move. I'm not afraid of challenging conversations and that kind of thing. And this book has given me my voice back to say, you know what? It's time to engage with those people that want to have that conversation instead of continuing to be quiet.
Yay.
That's powerful.
It is. Yay.
Yeah, I love that. And it's not only a
Yeah.
conversation from our group to the other groups, the groups that are other
Yeah.
than us. It's really important right now, I think, particularly among the majority groups in our culture, majority group, to have conversations with each other that help open eyes to people who do not see racism, who think it's, it only rises to the level of the KKK. That's what racism is. And I don't do that at all. And to see the more subtle versions of just how society functions, how they function in it, how they look past things that they don't need to look past. I think what I say right now among my friends, particularly Bob from a more conservative past, is really important. And I'm finding people writing me saying, my gosh, you're opening my eyes to things I haven't seen before, that I could be oblivious to what's going on in our culture for people of color because it doesn't affect my world. I can move through my day and I don't think about it. But I just tell them, walk into a room, walk into a store and watch how other people are treated that have different skin than them. And you'll begin to pick up that there is something going on here that you can live completely oblivious to. And that's what I hope that book does. It's what it's done for me, even working on it, is it's opened me up to see things in the culture I never saw before. Just wasn't aware of it. It wasn't in my world. It didn't affect my world. Now it does. And I think that's a place where change can really happen.
Can I chime in real quick?
Yeah. Oh, and real quick though, before you go, Cecil, I just wanted to clarify. So we're shooting for 6 o'clock as the finish date, or what should we try to?
Oh, Bob,
Oh, you're muted,
Bob,
Bob.
you're muted.
We got started a little bit late, so let's go.
Started a little late.
We're going to go about 6:15. Is that okay?
Yeah. I'm good with whoever. I just want to make sure.
So that gives us right now about 25 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. All righty, Cecil. What do you got, brother?
Yeah, I just wanted to say where I've been challenged and encouraged is the approach that Bob, that I have seen witnessed firsthand as well, the way that you set up an open table. You literally, have coffees and lunches with people. And I mean, you sit across the table from someone for 2-3 hours. You're really able to make connections. Our Nate was talking about that environment, and they're able to open up. And so I really appreciate that. And something as well in the book that stuck out to me is Arnita, you talked about this story of, several of them, but one of them was when you were opening up about just some ways in which that you were feeling uncomfortable or treated differently or what have you. And you were opening up to another sister, I believe she was a white sister, and you noticed that she was physically uncomfortable. Her countenance was like, I'm not liking the conversation. And so you would kind of shut down or what have, it wasn't a safe environment. You recognize that, and I think you mourned that because she was someone who you really cared about, and
sure.
Wayne, I remember in the book as well, you talked about, and I think this is great, just the nuance of life and who we are. And you said, you said something to the effect of, I may be considered a, conservative guy or Christian, by and large. However, just because I'm about like strong borders doesn't mean I can't have compassion on women and children who are, here, maybe like I could still have compassion on them and still like, be about this. I could hold both of them in my hands. And so I think those discussions, those nuanced environments at the table, they need to happen more. And I believe that kind of gets us closer together. So I really appreciated all that from the book as well.
One of the things that is interesting, I think it's very, very important for people to, or maybe for you to understand that when you are sharing and disclosing some things that are really hard, everybody has not earned the right to hear it, because everyone cannot help you hold that emotional pain or labor that you've had to hold with it. And you can normally see a visceral response with people. And you know what? They're just not safe. And it's not a bad thing. It's just for you to locate who you can have that level of conversation with. Mm-hmm. The travesty and the sad part is when you can't find anyone to have that with. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like being a minority in an all-white environment. It's very hard to find anyone to discuss racial stuff with, particularly aversive racism, the little microaggressions, the little stuff that slides in, the little jokes, it's virtually impossible to find that person. So my challenge in the book was try and be that person. I try to be that person. I want white people to try to be that person too. And I think, to just think that a lot of Black people are going to open up to you willy-nilly, that's just not going to happen for a while until you do a lot of proximity. And there has been a lot of relational trust built. And that's not something, that's something to certainly make a goal, but that's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight. That's the micro level of racial divide. Let me call it that, not the macro.
Bob, were you raising your hand a minute ago? I thought I saw your hand go up. No, okay, my bad.
No, I was literally giving a thumbs up.
Oh, thumbs up, okay.
Boom, 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 boom. But I do want to say, Matthew Edwards down here, how in the world have we not met yet?
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
I'm a little freaked out because I thought I knew everybody.
Okay.
So.
No, yes. Josh and Cecil invited me, so I thought I would roll in.
All right.
I did want to actually add to what Arnita said real quick, though. Because you raised a really interesting point. Something that I've thought about a lot recently is just how much of a responsibility do I have to initiate these discussions? Because in one sense, I totally understand where people are coming from when they say, I'm dealing with a lot of trauma, I'm dealing with a lot of pain. I shouldn't have to be the one to initiate these conversations. Because sometimes I do feel like that. I see what we see in the world, and we walk through life as Black people, and we do run into opposition, and we do run into pain, and sometimes this stuff hurts, and we have memories that that just might that just hurt us sometimes, and it takes a lot of energy to really deal with this stuff. And very frequently I do find that, like, if I'm in an area that's 100% white or that's mostly white, I typically have to be the one to initiate that conversation. So like on top of like dealing with whatever pain you have to deal with racism, you also find yourself responsible for like educating people on it and teaching people. And, you know, that can just kind of be difficult to do. So I thought it was really good, you know, like what you pointed out. It's like for even people who are white or for people who are Hispanic, people who are Asian, whatever, you know, be willing to be that person. I don't think, maybe occasionally, but I don't think somebody will ever be offended for you asking them, how are you feeling? You know, are you okay? You know, is everything that's going on, you know, is it affecting you in any way? Am I affecting you in any way? Is there any way that I can be of help to you? I don't think that's ever a bad thing to do. And if anybody, you know, if anybody really seeks to like we mentioned, like bridge the divide or to speak healing words, that would definitely be the first thing, you know, I tell them to do is just, you know, ask your friends who are Black, your friends of color, you know, ask them how they're doing, ask them how they feel about all this stuff, and be willing to help them. Part of the reason I do feel that responsibility, even, you know, having to deal with a lot of this stuff, is because I am a Christian man. And I do feel like, you know, if we're going to be teaching people about the love of Christ, and if we're going to be trying to lead people into the kingdom of God, we really need to think about the example that we're showing for people. I do think, you know, I think there should be a lot of work, you know, in our part to heal like a lot of racial issues. And that's not exactly the gospel. I don't want to completely confuse the two things, but I will say, like, if I'm sharing the gospel with people and I don't look like the gospel has happened in me, like, what is that going to do for people who want to come to know Christ? You know, when we pray, you know, we ask God, you know, let your kingdom come, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You know, are we allowing his kingdom to really take place in our hearts? You know, do our churches with people who are supposed to be, you know, temples of God, are they organized like, you know, like Christ says heaven will be? Like, do we have like, you know, do we have various nations in our churches? Do we have people who love each other? Even, you know, they're not the same, they're individuals, they're different, but do they respect and rejoice together? And do they love God, and do they love each other? If that's not true, like in our churches, that, I think that can really hurt our testimony. And I think if that doesn't exist where we are, we really need to ask ourselves, why is that? You know, is that just the way things are? Or is that a product of my sin? Is that a product of my selfishness? Is that a product of my, you know, maybe just my passivity? And I think these are things we need to challenge. Go ahead.
I have a question. You talk about it, you don't feel it's your responsibility, but there are also white people hurting right now. Mm-hmm. So should we ask them, are they okay as well?
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I think we should. Like, I feel like it's not my responsibility sometimes. But like, you know, again, as a Christian, like, it is my responsibility. Like, I always need to be willing to reach people with the truth and reach people with compassion, because, you know, the racial divide hurts people on both sides.
I would love to hear someone who's not Black answer that question. Do you feel like we should ask you, are you okay? Because, you know, other people are suffering too.
Anyone want to take that on? Any of the paler complexion?
Can I jump into this? So my name's Kim, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I love everything that y'all are saying, and my quietness is taking everything in, because I feel like I have so much to learn. But I wanted to respond to what Matthew said. And I really, really appreciate that simple question, how are you? The whole time I'm listening to this conversation, I'm thinking about the divide, the racial divide, the political divide. And one of my own experiences is so often that conversation, the depth of conversation that I can have with anyone is really dependent on the strength of the relationship I have with that person. And so many times the relationships don't sustain the weight of these heavy conversations. So when Matthew says that we can say to someone, how are you? That can come from the most genuine part of my heart, without pretense, I don't have to know a person at all. I don't have to know the woman ringing my groceries to ask her, how are you? And to mean that. And so I feel like that is such a powerful question, and such a wonderful way to even begin to share the love of Christ with someone, because genuine compassion and genuine empathy, to me, is the love of God. So I just wanted to say, Matthew, that I really appreciated that. And thank you for saying that, because I think it's a reminder to us that that's a good beginning always. I can't think of a situation where that doesn't, where that wouldn't be a good beginning. And as a white woman, if someone says to me, how are you? You know, I've been the church lady and it was fine. You know, that was the answer. Now I take it a little bit more to heart. You know, so I appreciate that question as well.
Yeah, and if I could chime in on Lena's question, yeah, I think it's fine to ask us, how are we doing? How are these events affecting us? What's going on in our heart? I think that's a fair thing to do. I want to say this to Matthew. I'm really sorry that you feel like you have to do this. It's kind of like the person who's lost their child at the funeral has got to comfort the relatives or the friends who come. You know, we often have care going the wrong direction. Care flows toward pain. It's not pain is the one that has to give care. And I think someone said in our last podcast like this, he said his little African-American family, said his little daughter asked him one day, Daddy, why are we the ones that always have to say we're sorry? And that's like pierces your soul when you hear that. I'm sorry you feel like you have to do that. I think it's great when you can. It lets people look into something I think most of the people who look like me miss oftentimes. But I hope it becomes more on us to say to people who, at this time particularly, this has got to affect African Americans more than it affects us in terms of the pain and hurt of it all. But the problem is, I think too many times ask how we're doing, and if people don't say great, we try to fix it. We don't just live with someone in their pain. We're going to try and talk their way out of it. And I think it's one of the big mistakes that we make with people. I think just to hurt with people, to listen to them, to own their pain, even if, and not try to say, oh, well, you're missing something. If you had these facts, you wouldn't hurt anymore. To avoid that kind of talk, I think would really enhance our ability to understand each other. And then we'd know more what to do together when we have that understanding.
Yeah, Wayne.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say that's super insightful from someone who is often accused of trying to fix everyone. I have had to unlearn that behavior to the best of my ability to simply be able to, you know, I don't have to chime in on every little thing that happened in someone's life. I can just sit and be their friend and Matthew, like you said, be someone who listens, and my love shows by the way that I just listen intently. So I thought that was very insightful, Wayne.
And that's one of the strategies. Your next question, Josh, is how are there strategies to bring healing to pain? What Wayne just discussed is one of the strategies to bring healing to pain. We are uncomfortable with suffering and we are uncomfortable with lamenting. And both of those things are part of being able to help a person heal. If you can just lament with me and sit there and hold my hand, I'm going to remember that. That's going to lead me to have other levels of conversation with you. Sometimes it's just okay not to know what to say, but to have the ability to just sit in it with someone. And I think particularly some of this racial stuff, there is no way you can understand what I'm feeling and going through as a mom of Black men. You can't. I don't even require that of you. But you can just say, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm gonna pray for the safety of your voice. You know, that may be all you can say. I have literally got hundreds of messages, hundreds. I can't even respond to them with people checking on me. So I made mental notes of that, but there's really nothing they can do, you know, other than that, which is a lot. You know, people think I gotta have all the right words. No, you don't. You can just say, I'm praying for you, sis. Sometimes it's just that simple. So in finding strategies to help people eliminate pain, I think it's important to be able to sit in it with them and not require them always be on the educating end. And one of the things that I hate about this, what's going on with George Floyd is, you know, I'll get people who are asking me, well, how do you feel about the looting and destruction? Well, that's not what started the problem. Why don't we talk about the knee on the carotid artery for 9 minutes? Why don't we go there? Because it's all cause and effect. But that's very insensitive to me for you to want me to go and give you an answer as a white American on why people are tearing up stuff. I don't want to talk about that right now. You know, in the last 2-3 weeks, I've seen a lot of people die that look like me or look like my children. So
now, I want to jump in and say that as I age and mature as a woman, I've come to know for myself it's okay not to be okay. And so I am trying to reassure or give other people that same permission. So like, I don't want to disingenuine anything. So if we're going to share a space, I want you to be sincere. Say, I don't know what to say to you, but I feel bad, or I don't know how to express how I feel. I think we need to give ourselves and other people that same permission to move. And the book does that very, very well. Even there in the approach of how you all post questions, you crawl, you walk, you run. So it shows the process, that it's a process, that it's not a one way, everybody fits all situation. And then Cecil posed a question to us in the chat about how do I feel. I swing a pendulum. There are moments that I am A-okay. And there are moments that I find myself in a rage, that I have to go in a corner and gather myself, or remove myself from all outlets so that I can be okay. Because I know that those of us, what my gift is, and that I am working to help others, and that rage is not going to help. It's not going to help me, and it's not going to help anyone else. So it's a place where, or in this season for me, that I'm going to own all of that, and I'm going to work to recognize that in myself, and not to put that off on anyone. It's not right, and it's not who I want to be anymore. I don't want to be. I'm a fixer too. I'm working on not being a fixer, because I don't want that. I don't want to own all of that for anybody else, and I want people to grow like I'm growing, so that we can move and do better.
Can I just ask for a show of hands of recovering fixers on the screen? Yeah. The first time that somebody actually said to me, I was very upset. I was a head of school in a tiny town, and there was actually a struggle over sexual identity, and we were in this crazy situation, and I was the head of school, and it was not going well. And I had someone who was a board member say to me, Janet, it's okay that everything's not okay. And I said, did you hear what you just said? That doesn't even make sense, you know? And if you listen to our podcast, the trailer on our podcast ends with, and remember, it's okay that everything's not okay. And so it is a growth thing, but I just think it's helpful for me to see y'all raise your hands and say, yeah, me too. You know, it's okay that everything's not okay. And we can learn to listen and not fix.
I feel like so much of what we're talking about and how to have these conversations is just very therapeutic. I have a mental health background, a master's in counseling psychology, and worked as a therapist for a few years. And it just parallels the therapeutic relationship so much in how you create, you develop relationship and creating safe space, and just being there with the person in their emotions. That's all just very therapeutic, and it's just very healthy in all relationships in general. And really, I think everybody should be trained in a little bit of mental health abilities. I think it would benefit our whole society. But I was just wanted to add that. And I wanted to go back a little bit and say thank you to Matthew for putting yourself, you feel like you kind of have to do that, but thank you for doing that, putting yourself in this white spaces and answering questions and educating people. We have some dear friends of ours who, a couple of families, African-American families, who purposely put themselves in white spaces, in white neighborhoods, in white churches, that they made that a point in their life. And I thank them for doing that, because they impacted us immensely and so many people in our church as well, and our friends. And so I appreciate you doing that, because I know it is taxing and exhausting. So thank you.
Can I answer Cecil's question as well?
Sure.
He asks, how do we feel when people ask us if we're okay? And it depends on the day, and it depends on the trigger, because we're traumatized at a cellular level because of racism. So if we pop off a little bit, and and this has happened because we're all talking on social media. I had a woman ask, what do African Americans want? And it blew my mind, because in my intelligence, we want the exact same thing everything everybody else want, right? We're not subhumans, we're humans. So we want what you want for your families, we want for you. So that question to me was rhetorical. It blew my mind. Well, how are you asking this question? And so she said, oh, well, if you're going to be popping off, then that's why people don't help you guys. Okay. So an Indian guy came in and he said, this is exactly why we have these issues, because you just turned this and made it about you. Yep. We're talking about a group of people who have been subject to racism, lower, you name it, the bottom of the bottom, not because we qualified to be there, but because of racism put us there, right? And we're fighting and we're trying to do the best. And so people say you have the same amount of time as we have. We don't have the same opportunity. So when they ask me that question, Cecil, it depends on what's going on. It depends on if I just saw George Floyd get murdered by a cop that my taxes pay to feed his family, and he has the potential to get off. And I think my Black son is that man. My husband is that man, no matter how much I'm raising them to be amazing humans. So you may get something from me that day that you may not get the next day. But what I need, white America, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, what I need Americans to understand, I need them to enter a space of grace, because we're fighting a fight that many have not fought. When we look at the work that MLK has done, every immigrant is here because of the back of a Black man. So we need some mercy and grace during this process. We don't need to be labeled angry Black women. We're passionate. We're fighting for our children. So it depends on the day how that feels. I am not a victim. I am not your slave. So to explain to you, it just depends on what trigger has triggered me when it relates to racism that day, but I do appreciate it. But my answer may not always be gentle.
Thank you for sharing that, Alina. Just as I'm listening to everybody, it was a nice segue into the question. I appreciated Arnita reading the question, because I didn't actually read it, but you all
That's
are.
okay. I'm a small groups pastor. I know how to. I know how to get us there.
So thanks for having my back there, Arnita. But yeah, so the question that you all have been really engaging with intuitively, I think, is this idea of, are there strategies that we can use to bring healing to the pain that we are all experiencing? And I appreciate all your insight about, what obligations do we have to check in on people, I think was part of what I was hearing there. Should people of color check in on white folks, or they have an obligation to check in on white folks, or should it just be the other way? I really appreciated what Wayne was bringing to our attention about context, about all these things are happening in context, right? So he kind of gave a really helpful metaphor, I think, about maybe somebody at a funeral who's lost their child, and you have other family members who are mourning with them, right? But if the cousin, or twice removed, kind of makes the whole thing about them all of a sudden, that's probably not appropriate, right? And it's probably not the bereaved, parent who's mourning, who's burying their child right there. It's probably not their job to stop everything and comfort the cousin twice removed who never met the child, right? So I think there's a context to everything. I appreciate what you guys are saying there, that if the parent wants to comfort them, I mean, that's huge of them, right? That's incredibly gracious of them, but there shouldn't be any obligation there, and we should kind of recognize the context in which this mourning is taking place. I think also something that some of my friends of color, especially who've been in white majority culture like churches, something they brought to my attention and noticed that, you folks seem to be, really on top of some issues and some things that affect your community, and you all grieve and you mourn that really well. But then there are some things where it's like it's affecting my community, and I'm not as well represented there, and it seems like it's going unnoticed, or it seems like people aren't really taking the time to mourn it, or maybe they're making that event about them. And so, yeah, I think these are some things that we really need to think about it. And maybe I heard too, like grace, right? I think Melody, I think you were talking about like extending grace and self-care. If you're not ready to have this conversation, if you need to grieve, I think it's great to give yourself that space. And then grace, right? I heard grace. We're going to misstep, and we're going to say the wrong thing, and maybe somebody has to explain it to us, right, and help us understand why this wasn't the right context for that, it wasn't the right time, or how we inadvertently were making it about us when it wasn't exactly about us. So yeah, I see we're really up against the clock. By my clock, it looks like it's 6:18. So I was thinking this last question, maybe we can just meditate on this, and this is kind of a call to action. So we've talked about a lot of different things, and I appreciate all the input and all these great insights into how we can approach these conversations. For this last thing, how are you? So this is the challenge to each of us, because we can talk all day, right? But how are we engaging in this beyond here? So how are you intentionally pursuing relationships with folks who are on the other side of the ideological aisle? So the people who, wherever you sit, they're the other, right? Wherever you sit, they have insane ideas, by your perspective. Wherever you sit, their ideas are destroying the world somehow and really scare you, right? And you can't even understand how they could come to those conclusions and how they could buy into that story that they're living under. So how are you going into those spaces? How are you, I think like Matthew and some others were pointing out, giving them that gift of a listening ear, right? As a way of loving them and giving them that dignity and saying, I value you. I want to hear and understand how you see the world. So that's something I kind of want to leave us with, and let that disturb us if we find that we're not. If we're like, I kind of just hang out with the people who I agree with, who see things my way, who look like me or who think like me. How am I challenging myself? How am I taking up my cross and intentionally putting myself in an uncomfortable place? That's something I'd like to leave us with.
Good. So Josh and Carolyn, I want to say thank you. This, I'll be real honest with you. I've got more hope than I did an hour ago. That's absolutely for real. More hope than I did an hour ago, and that's the goal. So we move forward. We love each other. We hear each other. We listen, and I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. This was pretty spectacular. And big thank you to Josh and Carolyn Armstrong. Show us your shirt, Josh.
Got the Common Ground shirt. There we go.
Come on now. There it is. All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up. So y'all have a good evening, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye now. Thank you.